Hello and welcome to Linking Out Loud, the digital PR podcast with me, Rachel McHugh. I'm joined today by Lau Miguez, international digital PR freelancer. Really excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. First of all, I actually did not know the name of the podcast and I love it. I think it's great. I think we didn't talk about it before. Yeah, so I love it. Brilliant. Really good.
Oh, good. Yeah, we brainstormed aggressively linking and digital PR puns and finally got this one. Plenty of jokes about having a remix of the Ed Sheeran song as the theme song, but I've yet to record that, so stay tuned. I realized with some of these early podcasts, it's been a bit of a pipe dream or just a thought, so haven't really been as forthcoming in all the details, I guess. So thanks for agreeing to come on my non-existent podcast at the time, but really excited to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about digital PR in Spain and in Latin America, which is very much your area of expertise, coming from Spain, but also working with loads of clients in those markets as well. So just to get started, for those of you who might not know who you are, could you give us a quick rundown of yourself and your career and what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, of course. I'm actually really bad at introducing myself. I feel like everyone takes like 20 minutes and tells like a really interesting and insightful story. I always go like, I'm a freelance digital PR. I work for Spanish and Latin American markets. I've worked in agencies before, obviously now I work for myself. And the range of clients I've had has been quite wide. I don't have really a niche. And I think we are going to talk about why now, but I don't work just in finance or just in language platforms or things like that. It's quite wide, but I feel like my knowledge has come from working for the UK clients and taking the digital PR expertise into these international markets, but with kind of a deeper knowledge of what they are like.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you work in the UK and you're working in the Spanish or any other market and you think of yourself as an international digital PR, some people will say, oh, your niche is international digital PR. But there's nothing niche about doing digital PR for the entire country of Spain or the entire continent of South America. So you do just sometimes end up working for such a range of clients. Even though you have a specialty, it's super broad and you do have to be a really solid generalist, which sometimes goes under the radar. So kudos to you. In terms of setting the scene then and learning a bit more about digital PR in Spain, how is journalism and how is the media landscape different in Spain than it is in the UK or even the US?
I think it ties really nicely to what we've just said. So in terms of like the digital landscape is very different. It's not as niche, it's not as specific in terms of publications. So obviously I remember, I will forever tell this story. I remember one day I was working in an agency and someone said, we need to make a media list of hiking publications. And that always and forever stayed with me and in my head, because trying to make a media list with hiking publications in Spain is quite literally impossible. It's just very, very specific. So I feel like that is the best way that I can describe. It's very much still in process, especially in certain parts of Latin America. You'd find that some of the digital publications are actually snapshots of the actual printed publication, but online. So I think that every single country is still going through a transition. I think Spain would be in the middle in between the UK and Latin America. Again, Latin America is huge, 33 countries. Not every single country is the same. So I feel like once you are trying to ideate a campaign, you need to consider that. If you're making in the UK and the US, because it's quite saturated, we are seeing that campaigns are getting more and more specific, more niched, and the angles of distribution as well. Whereas if you're going to go to Spain or Latin America, you need to consider that probably the majority of your media list are going to be nationals/regionals or very general niche publications. So if you make a very specific topic that doesn't have a lot of layers or different depths that you can try, if the very specific topic that you've done doesn't work, that's it. You're lost. You shouldn't have any other niches to go to. So I'd say there's so many differences, but if I had to pick and choose one that is very important to consider, I feel like that'd be one of them.
I think that's a really good point. We're quite lucky here in the UK that there is just such a massive breadth of publications and so many really niche ones. So you can have a campaign with not too many angles, but you have loads of different verticals that you can go to. If you're working somewhere like Spain, or we've had a similar experience working in France, there aren't quite as many publications out there, or they'll be under the same umbrella publication. So if you have an angle that doesn't land, then you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So having content with a few angles and different options, then you're in a much better position, I'd say, just generally speaking, as general advice. What would you say about how these nationals tend to cover stories? I know you've spoken in the past about how potentially it's a bit more serious, the type of coverage that you'll see, just the way they're approaching the same topics.
I think it really depends. Obviously, the press in Spain, especially, is less sensationalist than in the UK. So you'll not see it. Again, it really depends on the topic. If we are talking about lifestyle topics, it's easier than headlines are a bit more catchy. We are talking about, I think I'd put this example that there was this football manager that was exposed because he kissed. I keep forgetting about the names because I'm not really into football, but he basically kissed someone, one of the women, in the mouth. And obviously it was a huge deal. In Spain, it was very factual. The headlines we were seeing about that, whereas in the UK, it was very much like very shocking headlines with a lot of opinion, quite opinionated headlines. So I feel like, again, it really depends. There's certain lifestyle topics that you can see headlines like that. Whereas if you were to cover something in nationals like this, that is quite a huge topic globally, they'd be way more careful than in the UK. And I think one of the things that also we need to consider in terms of the UK and Spain, when we are getting trained to be PRs in the UK, the first thing that we are being told is you should be looking at the headlines of the journalists, because probably you're going to find like style there that you can mold into your own headlines to outreach to them. So it's a bit more catchy. And that in Spain, it's just not going to be a thing, because journalists are wearing so many different hats. Journalists in Spain are the PRs, really. So they are doing so many different things, covering such a range of topics, that it's going to be really difficult that you find a journalist that has a very specific style. I'm not saying that they don't have their personal style. They definitely do, but it's not going to be reflected on a headline. So that's probably going to be a waste of time. What you need to consider is make a headline that is interesting, that is catchy, and that is going to make them open the email. So I think that those things are, again, very different in Spain and in the UK. There might be a time where PR becomes like this huge thing in Spain and those things start to happen. But considering I was a journalist, I know the budgets that some publications have. And again, like I was working on a radio station where I was the producer, the speaker, and the tech. So you were literally doing absolutely everything. And I think that applies to, again, many journalists in the Spanish media landscape. So yeah, having like a headline style is not really a reality.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because you do often get that advice of, how are people covering it in the news? Try and replicate that. But if the journalist you're contacting is covering so many different things, then that might not work in the same way. Also, here in the UK, you can sometimes see, if you're going through Roxhill or just through different newspapers and news outlets, there are editors covering super specific things, and that's all they cover. So if you have a story that's really relevant to that, then you can go right to them and know this is totally your beat, but that might just not be the case in Spain. So just different things to bear in mind. And it's not to say that one thing's easier or harder or better or worse than the other. It's just different, which is the biggest thing to keep in the front of your mind. What are some of the other challenges that you found when doing digital PR in Spain or in LATAM even?
I think obviously again, repeating the thing that I said before, you have to know a lot more. Like you genuinely, especially now that I'm a freelance, a lot of companies do kind of tie Latin America together. So when it comes to actually doing a campaign for like Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, you have to do a lot of research. I think that is one of the challenges that obviously in the UK, first of all, you know the UK market very well, or you should. And second of all, you probably do have a niche. Normally, if you're working in an agency, they normally kind of like, if you're working in finance, more likely that you have one or two clients. Not always the case, but it does happen sometimes. So I feel like it's easier to be in tune with like journalists that you're talking to every day, with building relationships with them. When you're doing Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Spain, it's very, very difficult to maintain a relationship with all these journalists. So you need to ensure that your topics are hugely relevant and really interesting to them. I do have these journalists that I got. And as I said, that is the good thing about it being that general, because I can go to the same journalist with 3 different topics from 3 different clients and it still be relevant. Does that mean that is not relevant for the audience? Absolutely not. Like, the audience has less publications that they go to, less niche publications. So the same journalist might be targeting a lot of different audiences. But I feel like the other side of the challenge is, because of these, reactive and thought leadership is a bit more difficult. If you don't have very exclusive data or a campaign with a lot of different things that they can actually use in an article, it's very difficult that you can go to a journalist and just be like, this is my client, do you want an interview with them? And they'd be like, yeah, but who's your client? So I feel like, whereas I'm not saying the UK is easy, but I would say it's more straightforward. You can actually introduce your client to a journalist and be like, if you need this client for an interview, they are available for this and this topic. This is all the topics that we've covered in the past. And these are the things that we are working on at the minute. I feel like if you were to do that in other countries, you'd have to have built a relationship with them throughout a long time. I do have a client in Spain that now that is happening. They actually come to me to ask for interviews, but we've been working together for 4 years. So I feel like that's a different kind of relationship. So it takes time. And once you get there, they'd love you forever. But it's not like in the UK. The UK is kind of like speed dating. Here is like a long-term relationship, but it takes time. A long-term relationship takes time. You have to nurture it. You have to look after it. So I feel like in that respect, it's different.
Yeah, exactly. You got to play hard to get, or they're playing hard to get, I suppose. I find that in the UK, journalists are a bit more used to digital PR, perhaps. And that makes it a lot easier to just send out some information about a client and say, hey, I'm working with XYZ client. Are you interested in an interview? Because they know what you're proposing. They know why you're doing it. They understand the motivations. Whereas in some countries where digital PR isn't as part of the fabric of journalism, sometimes it's a bit less obvious why you're sending these things, or they just think, I don't know who this is. I don't want an interview with them. Move on to the next email. So you do have to offer them something that's really interesting, whether that's your exclusive comment or unique data, and they think, yeah, I want to cover this because I think my readership's going to find this interesting, not because a stranger has just emailed me asking for a link. So it's a slightly different approach, and you do have to try a bit harder or be at it for a bit longer before you see some of those same benefits. So you've obviously been working with clients in Spain for a while now. Are there mistakes that other people often make when they tell you they've been trying to land links in Spain and it's not working? Here's exactly what I did. And you think, oh, well, there's the red flag. That's probably why it hasn't stuck.
I think one of the things that we need to consider is, first of all, sourcing media lists for Spain in any databases that are UK, US based is probably a very bad idea. I've been working in Spain for 4 years and I still, till today, do every single media list manually. I think the majority of the journalists that I've seen in the media list that people send to me, and they are like, we've been sending this and it's not landing. I'm like, because you're not sending it to anyone that cares. So I think every single time that you source a media list from a database, please just make sure you check it. I feel like you have to do the same in the UK and the US anyway, but in Spain, 80% of them are not relevant. So I'd recommend, if you were to, genuinely, even if it is just 50 or 100, it's worth just doing like keyword search of whatever topic you've got and go to news, see who's written about it recently. And that will be more successful than sourcing a 200 or 300 people media list from a database that is very relevant. And then obviously be careful with sending emails. If you get blocked, which they love doing, Spanish journalists have the block button very present. I've seen agencies sending emails to the same journalist about the same irrelevant things so many times, in English many times. If the journalist thinks of you that you're irrelevant or that you're not sending them the right topics, that's kind of it. If you get blocked, all your agency will get blocked from that journalist. And again, there's not that many. There's a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like there's only 5 journalists in Spain, but there's way less than in the UK. So opportunity, and they do normally tend to stay longer in where they are. So it's not like they move as much as they probably move in the UK. So I'd say, be careful. You don't want to be irrelevant and be annoying and spammy, because that will stick with them. And if they see your email address or your agency's domain, they might actually block it or ignore it, and check your media list.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because you maybe don't have as many chances or as many strikes before you're out. So you can't just send a throwaway press release or just send the same thing again because they didn't open it the last time. Because if you're blocked, then actually that makes quite a bit of a difference to who you're able to outreach. So definitely bear that one in mind. We've spoken a little bit as well about Spain versus LATAM and how the approach really can't be the same. Do you have any major differences that you'd want to highlight in terms of how to approach these different countries?
I think it's just considering that they are two completely different markets. The only similarity is that they speak Spanish. And then I always say this, that yes, of course, there might be things that are more similar within countries that you can kind of like group them within. So for example, you're doing a global campaign, you know that the job market in X, Y, and Z is quite similar. So I'm going to group them together and do a campaign that is relevant for them. And that's absolutely fine. As long as you know that it's similar, it's fine. I feel like the mistake is treating them as the same just because the language is the same, which is not even the same. It's different.
Yeah.
It's just, I can understand people Spanish from Latin America and they can understand me, but it's not the same language at all. And I think it's the same of saying like the UK and the US is the same. The UK and the US, for example, again, with the job market example, is very different. Like the job culture is very, very different. I've seen it with, again, working in an agency with people from the US and people from the UK. The relationship and the culture and all these is very, very different one from the other. So I feel like it's not bad to group countries if you do consider that, for example, you need to do a global campaign. I understand the budgets are tight, but always consider why are you grouping them? Are you grouping them because they speak the same language, or are you grouping them because you know they have a similar, I don't know, a sports fan base, or, you know, they are interested in the same sports or sports personalities or things like that? That would be a great way of grouping campaigns if you don't have a lot of budget and you want to do a more generalized outreach and you can do only like these pieces of content and you can't afford to do one per country. You know, that is a way better, more intelligent way of grouping them than just going, oh, they speak Spanish, I'm just going to send everything to them. And even I'm outreaching the same campaign to Mexico and Chile. And believe it or not, Mexico is the first in the ranking and is working so much better in Chile. So I think if that doesn't give a clue of the fact that they work differently, Chile, I think, is in the 5th position. Mexico is in the 1st. Chile has a way smaller pool of publications and journalists than Mexico, and is still giving better results in Chile than in Mexico. So that just proves that markets are different. Obviously, I'm saying that I've done the same campaign. Let me clarify. Campaign is very different data for Chile and Mexico. So the data is very specific for each country. It's just the idea is the same. And obviously the ranking, but the kind of data is specific for each country.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you've got the same topic and it's of interest in both countries, but one thing lands and the other doesn't. It's very tempting if you've got a client and they say, I want to target Peru, Colombia, and Spain. Let's do a campaign that we can target all of them with. But the chances of having some kind of global campaign that includes all of them and they all rank in an interesting position, and then also they're all interested in the same thing, it gets smaller and smaller with every step that you add. That language thing is also really important. It's very easy to think, oh, it's the same language, so I'm just going to send the same press release or use the same campaign and just work out across these different countries. But even when you're outreaching to the US and it's in English, if you're going to make the effort to write in American English and make sure that it has the right style, that's going to go so much further and look much more slick than if you just send it in British English and leave those differences in. And same for Spanish, just take note of those cultural differences and those linguistic differences. So we've talked about things that might not work. So just using the same idea across the pond. Let's talk a little bit then about coming up with campaigns for different markets. What should you bear in mind when you're coming up with ideas to make sure that your campaign is going to get links?
Yeah, I think ideation is 90% research. And some people would be like, how do you come up with these ideas? It's not that I am, sat here and all of a sudden I just go, and it just happens in my head. I do a lot of research. The first thing that I do every single time, not every single time I get a client, every single time I start a campaign, is I've got a document that I pull all the kind of like ideas and all the documentation about the client, about the market, all these different things. And then depending on what kind of like things I want to do, I do a lot of research for this campaign that I just did that actually happens to be the same for Mexico and for Chile. That's why I gave the example about the job market. Turns out both Mexico and Chile are two of the countries with the highest working hours in Latin America, but Chile is actually reducing their working week to 40 hours, which is insane. They're actually reducing it to 14 hours, not
Oh my
lowering
God.
that. Yeah. I think Colombia, the average is like some people work like 48 hours a week. We can see that obviously it's a topic that can be applied to a few countries. The difference here is Mexico is talking about doing it. Chile has already done it and is going through that transition. So knowing these things, you can do a campaign that can be relevant for both. And the idea can be exactly the same for both. But I do feel like you have to acknowledge the fact that in one country it's not happened yet, and in the other country has already happened, and they are already making that decision, that progress towards a 40-hour working week. Every single campaign that you do has to come from a lot of ideation. That research is going to help you in every single step of the way, because if you read the news and you know what's going on and you find out what it's interesting people, you will be better at writing the content, sourcing the data that can be interesting, filling the gaps. What is people not talking about? What is people not yet realizing that can be a topic of conversation that can be interesting? What data you think could be interesting is not there yet. And then when it comes to distribution, you already have a lot of journalists that, are writing about the topic that and as I said, it's more general. So it doesn't need to be a journalist that is writing about something specific. If a journalist is writing about the job market, they will be very likely to be interested in your campaign. It's not as specific as in the UK. So you've got a lot of the job done. So, not doing this at the beginning, it's just going to be a waste of time in every stage of the process. As a digital PR, your brain is wired to come up with ideas from data, interesting, creative ideas. And that is a lot of practice and also inspiration. Just don't be scared to go into the UK and see what worked and what didn't. I wouldn't take the campaign per se, just I normally do have to add a lot more layers to campaigns, ideas that I see or, inspiration that I get. But it's great to see inspiration from other markets and seeing what worked and what didn't. But that first bit of research is going to be so helpful along the way that I genuinely struggle to see why people is not doing it.
Yeah, it's so tempting when you haven't got much time on a retainer or you want to get to outreach or you've got targets to hit, just to rush through ideation, get some ideas that you think will work and start pitching those as soon as you can. But don't underestimate the importance of research. If you can spend the time coming up with really solid ideas that you've verified are relevant and, not tone deaf, then you can save yourself all that time later that you might spend pivoting the campaign that didn't land in the first place because you didn't research it properly. You mentioned as well how you're working on clients from so many different industries. We're just human. There's no way that you can be an expert on everything that's happening in pop culture and in the news in general, but also what's happening in your industry and your niche in multiple countries, in multiple markets. Try as you might, it's very difficult. So you do just have to spend that time when you're working on ideation to double check what's happening and make sure that it's relevant.
I actually have a really good example of this, and it was, I hate saying it was a mistake. I'd say it was a learning. As I said, it's really difficult to know what's going on. This was a regional approach of a campaign that was talking about the most, I think it was welcoming cities or something like that. Again, Latin America, very different from one place to the other. To be fair, it could happen everywhere. But it was an area of Latin America that was actually struggling with crime at the minute. And obviously, I did send that campaign saying, your city is one of the most welcoming, blah, blah. And obviously this journalist was like, hi, we are experiencing like very, very high crime rates at the minute. This happened to me like 3 years ago. And I was scared and that because I was like, oh my God, but it does feel like you're walking into a room and everyone's talking about funeral, someone dying, and you walk in with a joke and everyone's looking at you like, why are you talking about this? You don't know anyone. You don't know what they are talking about. You just slam the door, walk in and crack a joke. And everyone's like, not the time. This is super tone deaf. So I think that is very similar to just going into a country, just your story without checking what they are talking about. Again, it's not mistake, it's a learning. I don't think the journalist was hugely offended. Sometimes you understand that was a very regional thing. And again, when we are reaching so many countries and so many regions, it's very difficult to kind of know everything. But I think that is important to have in just a little bit of research before making sure that you're not making a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you do have to slip up to learn from your experiences. So it's happened to the best of us. And you're not asking people to know everything about every journalist and what they got up to at the weekend and what their hobbies are and read all their articles so they can comment on it in an outreach email. It's just knowing what's happening in general. So you know where your story sits in the wider news, because ultimately that's where it's going to be published. So it has to be relevant. And the journalists will be more aware of that than anything because they're working in the news. So you can't bypass that. I suppose another question that comes to mind is about AI. So we've talked about needing to do research and understanding the media landscape. So I suppose some people would just say, well, there's ChatGPT now, there's Claude now. Why can't I just check there? Do I need to really know what's going on? What are your thoughts on that?
I think ChatGPT is a great help. I don't think you should ask ChatGPT what's going on in Spain, but it's a great way. So, for example, if you find several different articles that are talking about something specific that you want to find out about, I don't have the time to go through every article. I do copy paste, put ChatGPT, maybe can you make me a document with the most relevant information? As I said, I work with like many different countries. I don't have the time to do research and write up and like all these things. Sometimes ChatGPT is great. Obviously, please check everything that ChatGPT does because it does a lot of mistakes. Like genuinely, when people just like, it's just going to take our jobs. No, it won't, because I have to check it all the time. But fact checking, obviously, always, that goes without saying. But again, sometimes like Wikipedia can be as wrong as ChatGPT and we all use it to do some research. So I feel like ChatGPT has this kind of like bad idea that if you're using it, you're a bad professional. But I feel like we all use Wikipedia to find out information about something or an article. And we know sometimes journalists are not that trustworthy when it comes to their sources. So I feel like everything you do online, absolutely everything, unless you're reading like a .org kind of article or whatever, everything needs to be fact checked. But again, it's a great starting point for these things. I find it really useful sometimes. I work on my own to bounce campaigns and ideas. Obviously, ChatGPT is not ideating my campaigns because the campaigns that it comes up with are useless. But it is a great way of being like, I've got this campaign idea, I've got this campaign idea, and you bounce. And, it's a great help from in many ways.
You're right. It does get a bit of a bad rep sometimes. And you've seen some of the ideas or content that it's come out with and you think, no human's ever said anything like that. But nice try. But it is a good tool and it's a good resource. And I wouldn't have thought of it like that because I work in an agency and I have a team. But if you haven't got that luxury or you're working by yourself, or even if you're just working at home, having something that you can bounce ideas off of, sometimes it's so much easier to reflect on your own ideas when you're able to have that sort of rally. So I like that. Do you have any other tools or tips that you use when you're working on digital PR that you think are worth sharing?
Yeah. So to be fair, I've been using Rocket Reach. I've been trialing it. I'm not loving it for international. I feel like every time I try to find a journalist, I can't find it. So what I'd recommend is like doing a keyword search and finding news. And then once you have the article, it won't give you the specific journalist Gmail, whatever, but it will give you the structure in his Hunter. It's a bit pricey if you pay by month, but I think like on a yearly basis, actually quite, approachable. And I think if you work in a country, you get to a point that you know exactly what structure a publication uses for their journalists. But if you were to go to a different country, you have no idea what is the structure, like what emails they use. It does get a bit difficult in Latin America, especially with regionals, because they don't normally have like a publication Gmail. It's only theirs, but they are quite approachable if you do sometimes add them on LinkedIn. Twitter is not that popular, I'd say, for Hispanic or like Spanish journalists. Not all of them use it, and I don't know if I'd advise sending them a message on Twitter, but for example, on LinkedIn, I do find that sometimes adding them and stealing their email address, and so maybe I'm making a mistake with sharing this tip because everyone's going to start adding everyone on LinkedIn. But if you add someone on LinkedIn and they accept you, if you go to contact info, it does give you their email. So I do use that a lot as well. But I'd use these as a last resort. Let's not annoy anyone on LinkedIn. If you're desperate to get in contact and you know they are super relevant for you and they are going to love your campaign, then I'd use that because you're going to probably help them instead of annoying them. But please don't add every single journalist on LinkedIn because they are going to hate us. Common sense. Just
common sense. Yeah. A bit of common sense when using that tip so that everyone on LinkedIn doesn't get bombarded and then the whole digital PR industry in Spain implodes. I like that tip actually, and I will probably start using it because I think one of the biggest things that we've found in terms of day-to-day differences, trying to do digital PR in Spain and same in France, I think it's so much harder to build media lists. You can't just go to Rox Hill and type in digital news editor or environmental news editor and then get a list of 20 people. You might get one and they left the publication 5 years ago, or the publication got bought out by someone else and the email format's changed and no one puts their emails on the website. So it can be quite manual and quite a slog. The pro of that is that you then end up probably getting a list of more relevant people when you can actually find the details, but it definitely takes a bit of patience. Hunter is a really good tool for that.
I think that one of the things that people ask me the most is, should it be taking me this long? And I always say, yes, it should. That means you're doing a good job. And as I said, every single time I had people sending me media lists and tell me, why is this not working? And they go through the angles and they go through everything. I'm like, this is a good campaign. These are great angles. Your media list is rubbish. And it's because you probably got it from a database. And I'm sorry, but that's the case. And I remember at first, I genuinely thought it was me when it was taking me forever. I genuinely thought, you're starting, don't have a lot of experience building media lists. Obviously, I'm definitely quicker because you learn the tricks, how to find certain emails, but the actual manual job is exactly the same. And I think if anyone's out there that wants to do a very good, easy kind of to find and cheapish media list database of Spanish journalists, there's a huge niche there because I've tried every single big media database in the UK. And even though they do say it's international, it's very, very outdated when it comes to other countries. Very outdated. I've not tried Latin America in those media bases because as a freelance, it's just not worth it for me. But for Spain, it was very outdated. I never could build a media list. But once you build it, that's something that you've got for yourself that is quite powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely relate to that feeling of, why is it taking so long? Because I learned digital PR through UK clients, and then I got better at media list building and it got faster, and I was like, cool, I know what I'm doing now. And then I tried working with clients in France and Spain, and suddenly I was like, why is this taking me so long? And my media list is only 10 people long. So it's a real learning curve, but then hopefully you can build those relationships and reuse some media lists and know who you're contacting with the right kind of stories or the right clients. So pros and cons, but it's definitely a different experience, let's just say. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there's any questions that you wish I'd asked or something that you want to share that you feel like everyone in digital PR should know.
Just one thing that I always say, that this is my go-to when I talk about ideation or journalists. I think that we talked about treating Latin like a country, which is not. But I feel like treating Spain like a unit is the same mistake. When I'm talking about Spain, I'm talking about every other country, but Spain is obviously where I'm from and I can see the differences. I feel like we need to be aware of the cultural differences within a country. Same way that we see in the UK. Not everyone is the same. Not everyone talks about the same. Not everything is relevant for everyone. When we talk about the weather in Spain, where everyone asks me like, don't you miss the good weather in Spain? And I always say, I'm from the north. Where I'm from is probably one of the rainiest cities in the state. So the weather in the winter is not that different. So considering that, especially if you've got certain products and stuff like that, it's key. If you're selling a product, it's very, very key that you consider the South is not the same as the North. But everyone that is doing campaigns in Spain or any of the countries, just consider that regional differences are quite big, and culturally they can be very, very different.
Yeah, just be sensitive to those cultural and those regional differences. That's really important. Cool. Before we finish off, I like to do a little this or that segment. So just a quick fire round. I'll give you 2 options and you just let me know based on gut feeling. You don't have to explain it, which one you choose. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is UK or Spain for digital PR?
Spain. Of course.
I saw that one coming. Moz or Ahrefs?
Ahrefs.
Online coverage or print coverage?
Whoa. As a digital VA, it's really bad to say, but I do like a print coverage. I'm going to go for print coverage. It hits different.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You're now banned from the digital PR community. Morning or afternoon outreach?
Mornings. It depends. Latin America is always in the afternoon/evening because they are waking up at that time. So
that's true. Reactive or campaign PR?
Campaign.
Bulk send or send individually?
Oh, send individually, always.
Interesting. And finally, face-to-face meetings or virtual meetings?
Virtual, I'm going to say. I love face-to-face meetings, but I do find that sometimes it takes you 3 hours to get there. You have a half an hour meeting, then it takes you 3 hours to get back. So they feel quite exhausting. And I do love talking to people. So I feel like if I do them virtually, I can talk to more people. As you know, I'm a quite people person, but I feel like now I could cheat more meetings if I do them online. So
that's so true. I had Stephen Kenwright on the show and he said pretty much the exact same thing. Just having more time to meet more people and not wasting so much time sat on a train, which is exactly valid. So I can totally see why. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Lau, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. And I think you've tapped into a lot of really interesting things there that will be useful for a lot of people, myself included. So thank you very much. To everyone listening, Lau is on LinkedIn and she has a website coming soon. So I will link that all below so you can check her out. Do give her a follow and see what she's up to. And a reminder to also follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. And stay tuned for the next episode.